Nintendo's Shigeru Miyamoto.
At some point, I realized that games could actually draw out people's emotions. Since then, my own childhood memories have been reflected in my games.
In 1980, Miyamoto took his fertile imagination to a little-known company called Nintendo, based in the ancient capital of Kyoto. For nearly 100 years, Nintendo had been manufacturing Hanafuda flower cards, traditional Japanese playing cards. But when the company's president, Hiroshi Yamauchi, had seen the success of arcade games like Space Invaders, he developed Nintendo into a computer games company. Miyamoto was hired as an artist. He never dreamed he would be asked to make computer games.
Miyamoto was a spacey, flighty, really imaginative artist. The last place he ever expected himself to wind up would be in a big company.
I hated computers. I didn't trust in tangible things like electricity.
The next twist of fate was a crisis call from America. Nintendo had established a small US headquarters in Seattle. The arcade era was booming, with Atari at the forefront, and Nintendo wanted a piece of the action. Nintendo of America had ordered 2,000 units of a hit Japanese game called Radarscope. But in America, the game was a disaster. Head office in Kyoto was asked to create a replacement game. Without a single designer available, it was decided that it was time to give their youngest recruit his big break.
Miyamoto was completely baffled and completely overwhelmed with the idea. He started to do the research. He spent time in arcades and he spent time with kids who were playing games and tried to understand what they were about. And he started to have this vision of video games being more like movies. Why couldn't they tell stories?
So Miyamoto created a simple story and colorful cartoon characters for his groundbreaking new game.
Let me show the first sketch I drew for Donkey Kong. The gorilla escapes from the cage, snatches the girl, and runs away with her. The man chases him, dodging all these barrels with a hammer in his hand. At the end, a hole appears in the ground, and the gorilla falls down, and he dies.
To bring his cartoon characters to life, Miyamoto had to work within the limits of the technology of the time.
All of a sudden there was a question, what kind of hair did this guy have? The problem is if he's falling in a video game, you'd have to have his hair do something that the designers just couldn't deal with at the time, which is inertia would make his hair blow up, and it would sort of be sticking up as he was falling down. So the way that Miyamoto solved that problem is he gave him this little red hat.
As a final touch, Miyamoto wrote his own music for the game, and it was shipped out to Seattle. It remained to be seen whether Donkey Kong would have more success than the failed Radarscope game it was supposed to replace.
People in America saw this game and thought that the Japanese, their Japanese counterparts were insane.
Fearing the worst, Nintendo's American team decided to try out the game in a local bar, just like Atari's Nolan Bushnell had done with Pong a decade earlier.
A day later, they go back to the Spot Tavern, open the little coin box, and lo and behold, there's $30 in quarters in that little coin box. It's almost overflowing. That says that machine was operating almost every minute that tavern was open from noon until midnight when it closed that day. And I said, wow, what kind of aberration is this? It's all the market research I need. Let's go.
The company made $100 million in sales in the first year alone. And Donkey Kong went on to become an international superstar through a whole series of games for years to come. Meanwhile, Donkey Kong's original owner, Jumpman, went on to greater fame and fortune. In 1985, the company announced the launch of a new home console for the American market, the Nintendo Entertainment System, or NES. Following in the wake of the collapse of the US games industry, most observers thought Nintendo were crazy. But Nintendo had a secret weapon. Miyamoto took computer games to a whole new level with his next masterpiece, Super Mario Bros. Jumpman was reincarnated as an Italian plumber called Mario.
Mario can do amazing physical things, like high jumps. But he's not superhuman. He drowns in water and gets hurt if he falls from high places.
Miyamoto created a side-scrolling world for him to explore, full of pipes and sewers as well as ledges and cliffs. And he created an entire army of colourful cartoon monsters.
In the early test version, Mario was very big. Next I created Small Mario. The game became more interesting with both. Then I wondered what kind of magic food could transform Small Mario into Big Mario. So I created that unwholesome-looking red mushroom.
He was making these wondrous universes that it was like falling through the looking glass.
The game and its two sequels became some of the best-loved games ever. By 1987, Nintendo's NES console had become the #1 toy in the world. And a survey revealed that more American children recognize Mario than Mickey Mouse. Then Miyamoto unveiled his masterpiece. In 1987, Nintendo released the first of a series of games that has become widely acclaimed as one of the greatest games ever made, the Zelda series. The Legend of Zelda moved beyond platforms and levels. It offered players a vast, magical world to freely roam and explore.
The story begins with a child standing in the middle of a field. He doesn't have a sword or a shield. The player starts by naming the child, but then he has no idea what to do. He wanders around the field looking for things to do. It was a very daring concept back then.
More than any before it, this was a game in which the player would experience a sense of progress, gaining new equipment, becoming stronger and more skilled as the adventure unfolded.
When the child grows up, the player thinks, I used to be scared of this, but now I'm very strong. That's the kind of game I wanted to make.
Taking over 100 hours to play the game to the very end, The Legend of Zelda perplexed, intrigued and consumed players all over the world. It was a sensation that broke all the rules and defined a genre that has dominated game design ever since. By the end of the 80s, Nintendo had sold over 30 million NES consoles, hundreds of millions of games, and it held an extraordinary 85% of the entire world games market. Nintendo had become the ultimate boss of the game industry game. It was about to consolidate that position with a radical new portable game system that would appeal to boys, girls, and even adults, the Game Boy. What was needed was the perfect game to launch it. It soon became clear that they would go to extraordinary lengths to find that game.